It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. Welcome to this video on developmental psychology. I will be looking at Piaget's theory and Piaget's application to education. So this is for the AQA GCSE psychology course. So to begin with, hopefully you've got an understanding already of who Piaget is and what some of his ideas are. If not, go back through, have a look through the earlier videos. But looking at Piaget's stage theory, his idea of schemas, assimilation, accommodation, egocentrism, conservation, and his different stage theory of education. His theories became popular and more people were aware of them. And so while Piaget himself never actually directly applied his studies to education, others did. So from the 1960s, educationalists, people designing curriculums and looking at schools and education systems at government level, looked at Piaget's theories and said, well, what can they teach us about education and how children develop and learn? Seems like quite a sensible approach to take. So from his theories, we get the ideas of things such as readiness, about learning by discovery, and individualized learning. So those are three of the key applications. What you also need to know is how each of the different stages, so sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational stages, what that means for learning. So understanding those stages, what does that mean? How do you apply that to education and the classroom? So to begin with, looking at readiness. So Piaget, from his theory, we get the idea that actually you should take into account the readiness of the child to be able to access certain types of information. So Piaget said that as children grow and they develop in stages as they get older, well, knowing this then, what that would suggest is you should only be introducing to children to topics that they are ready to attain. So then if they're not at the biological, if they're not old enough to look at certain cognitive and logical tasks, you shouldn't introduce them to them. So for example, he said things like the pre-operational stage or the concrete operational stage, you can look at algebra. Well, you shouldn't be looking at that beforehand. It's too difficult for the child. And so Piaget's theories and the idea of readiness is that learning should always be appropriate to the age of the child. And if they're not old enough, they're not truly going to understand. It's going to give them a poor understanding of whatever topic it is, and actually maybe hinder their progress later on if they've misunderstood earlier. The second of his ideas or his theories that have been applied is that, okay, knowing what we know, the role of the teacher. And so there's some suggestion, again, we'll look at the evaluation because this isn't actually necessarily held up in today's education system, but some understanding that children should learn by discovery, and the teacher's role is to help the children discover rather than to directly tell them. So looking at Piaget's theory, Piaget would believe that children need to discover the world at their own pace, at their own time, and looking at their schemas, they need to develop their schemas later on. And so if you apply his theory, it would suggest that it is the teacher's role to ensure that they are able to assimilate new information and widen their existing schemas, or be introduced and given the chance to look at new areas, and so to accommodate and develop brand new schemas. And so yeah, that's where we look, and children should be given that opportunity, and it's the teacher's job to allow this development of schemas, this assimilation, accommodation. And the environment should be made to be challenging, so it's just outside of their reach but still accessible by them. There's something called the zone of proximal development, not on the specification, but it's one of Piaget's ideas, which suggests that they develop by having new things that they haven't learned yet, but it's related to things that they have learned, and that aids the schema development. Next then, it's the idea that learning should be child-centered, or individualized learning as it's known, and so it should be related to that individual child. So Piaget believed that children go through stages, they go through the same stages in the same order. However, some children are a bit quicker at getting to the next stage than others, and so it's this idea that you should take the individual learning needs into account. It should be child-centered based on the child in front of you, and so teachers need to be aware of what groups are able to do, look at smaller groups, and don't always teach all the children everything at the same time, and that certainly does still happen and hold up in education at the moment. So those three ideas, looking at the readiness, looking at discovery learning, and looking at child-centered are the broader ideas around Piaget's application to education. Next, then, we need to look at how we specifically apply his stages of development. So the first stage of development was the sensory motor stage. This was between the ages of well, when they were born and 2. As a reminder, this is where the child's development is mainly focused on what we call sensory motor, so senses, seeing, touching, smelling, hearing, tasting things, and movement. So they're developing, they're starting to crawl and walk and things like that. Well, how do we apply that to education then? Well, that means that the development and the environment should be linked to those things, to senses and movement. So if children can be given stimulating toys, so you might see kind of baby toys and mobiles and things that are all, they're squeaky, that you can hear them, they've got different textures and touches. So you might see reading books that they can actually touch. You've got a sheep that's fluffy, or a cow that's leathery, I don't know, and so that kind of helps their development. And also then coordination as well, so you might see baby strollers and things like that where it can help them move around. That can help their development if their learning is linked to their stage of development, their sensory motor stage. Next, you've got the pre-operational stage. So this is between the ages of 2 and 7. Remember, this is where Piaget said that children are not logical or consistent. This is where the conservation and egocentrism task came in. So they can't necessarily, Piaget would suggest, can't understand conservation of number, so that the counters task, or conservation of volume, so that's the glasses task, or egocentrism, so that's the 3 mountings task, where they can't see things from other people's point of view. So how do you then apply that to education? What does that then mean for teaching children? Well, actually, if you can do tasks that can help them develop through that stage, that would be good. So if you can do kind of role-playing tasks, if children, and you get this, little boys and girls like dressing up, and they end up then learning the roles of others. So that's kind of hands-on discovery learning, and again that applies in the conservation side of things as well. So if you can have games that include counting or manipulation of things, so plasticine, Play-Doh, things like that, that should really help. And actually children should be encouraged to experiment and try new things in different areas, and that can help them develop through the pre-operational stage of development. Next, you've got the concrete operational stage of development. So that is from the ages of about 7 to 11. And this is where children have started to get conservation and egocentrism, but this tends to be on quite, hands-on tasks, things that you can see, touch, feel. Is quite tactile, quite obvious, and there. So this is where children should be given good physical tasks. So if they want to help their counting, actually given things to count can help. That's where you had abacuses before. Things like cooking will help them understand, again, number, volume, things like that, because they're actually doing it hands-on. They might still struggle at this stage to have a debate about with you about morality and justice and things like that, because they aren't at that formal operational stage. Which then brings us on to the formal operational stage. So this is 11 plus. What should we be then taking children through? So they should, Piaget would suggest, they should be logical reasoners and be able to follow arguments. And so how do we apply this? Well, this is where then they should be introduced to debates and scientific thinking, discussion of what an ideal world might be, theoretical propositions they should be able to access. So if you're applying the stages of development, that's how you would apply them. Evaluating this then, can we actually apply Piaget's theories well to education? Well, kind of yes and no. So in the yes camp, the strength, it has actually been applied, and that did happen. So actually in the 60s, the Plowden report, this is a government initiative, and they actually applied Piaget's child-centered active approach to primary education. At the time, primary education was about rote learning, so that's learning facts off by heart, and that's all they had to do. Well, actually, from this report, it started saying, well, actually, no, we need to take the individual child into account. They need to have discovery learning, and they should only be introduced to things when they are ready for that. And some of that thinking does still exist at the moment. And the benefit of this, then, the conclusion, if we're doing PEC, is that Piaget's theory did have strong application. It suggests it's quite valid, and it has changed kind of education the way that we know it. However, not all absolutely positive, and there are some weaknesses here. And actually, the idea that you should only introduce children to things when they're absolutely ready, well, that's not actually been found to be the case. So sometimes actually you can present children with skills that in Piaget's theory and the stage theory that would suggest they're not ready for, but actually if they practice at that, they can get better. So that has been done. So Brian and Trabasso looked at introducing children to logical thinking. These were pre-operational children. So Piaget would say that they had to be in the concrete operational stage over 11, but actually pre-operational children have been introduced to this sort of thinking, and they, with training and practice, they can get better and they could solve these equations. So that actually goes against Piaget's theory, and it goes against the application of it to education, that it is strictly limited to these stages, and you can only introduce children to them at these certain times. So it goes against the theory and suggests actually you can introduce children to some of this task before they reach the Piagetian stages. And then finally, certainly there's still a debate kind of in modern education and teaching over kind of this discovery but versus kind of directed learning, as it would be called. So sometimes discovery learning is helpful, but it's not always the best approach. And Bennett and others have researched this and found that actually children, you can compare a group taught by discovery learning compared to those taught by direct instruction, by the teacher telling children things, and actually the direct instruction is quite often better. So things like certainly reading, maths, English. Of course, if you're letting a child discover something on their own, it might be the fact that they don't ever discover the nuances, or you've got that English teacher, that maths teacher who really knows their subjects, have been through it, they've taught it for years, they've got their degree. They're obviously going to have a stronger understanding of that topic than a child who's just discovering it. What if they don't discover the right thing? So it's this, often I think a mix is needed. You need a bit of both, but certainly that direct instruction, the research does suggest that that really helps with lots of tasks, and so that would go against this idea of discovery learning, and it suggests that learning is better through direct instruction rather than this active learning, as Piaget would suggest. So there's certainly some application there, bit of a mixed bag, but yeah, it's certainly been applied. Hopefully that helps you to go over some of the Piaget theories as well, learn it in a bit more detail when you're looking at Piaget's theory as a total, as a whole, which you obviously will need to do, looking at the stages, looking at schemas, assimilation, accommodation, ecocentrism, conservation, all the different stages, then applying, looking at application, that can help you kind of evaluate his theory in total. Hopefully you found that helpful, and then the rest of the topic, then the developmental topic looks at some other applications as well. So you look at kind of Dweck, and you look at learning styles and the evaluations of that. Hopefully that was helpful. Thanks. Thank you.